My name is Selene Bruk. I was born in Białystok, Poland. It was a population of about 100,000 people, and 60,000 Jews lived in Białystok. My family were in business. We lived together with my grandparents, an uncle and an aunt, my mother and my brother and myself. In our house we spoke Yiddish, Polish, and German. I was going to school when the war broke out. I was only in 5th grade when the war started. I remember the day vividly because the day before the war started, I was out with my girlfriend walking the streets. This was the pastime that we used to walk out in the street to meet friends. My girlfriend was playing piano, and I used to go with her to the Conservatorium to watch her, to listen to the music. We were supposed to meet again next day, but next day never came. I woke up early in the morning. It was a big crash I heard. I almost fell out of my bed. When I got out of bed, I saw my family standing in front of the window looking out. There were some airplanes in the sky, and we didn't know that Germany attacked Russia and that Russia was being bombed. Our city Białystok was being bombed. It was 3 hours later when it was announced over the radio that Germany attacked Russia. For almost a week, there was complete pandemonium in the city. People were coming, people were going. There were rumors. We didn't know what was happening. We saw soldiers coming back from the front. It was the following Friday that the German army entered Białystok 6 o'clock in the morning. The first thing, they took out about 2,000 men, and they put them into the largest temple, closed the doors, put in the incendiaries, and started a fire. These people burned alive. From that point, the city started to burn. The homes in the surrounding area were made of wood. So the houses started to burn, and people started to run out of the homes. Where do you run? The fire was spreading very fast. A lot of the people were running to the cemetery because that was one place that it wasn't burning. My family went to the other part of Białystok where non-Jews lived, and some friends took us into their house. The following morning, there was a knock in the door. The Germans were searching for Russian soldiers. They took men. We were very scared. It was a frightening experience because my uncle and my brother were with us, and we didn't know whether they were going to take them too. The screams, the yelling, the shooting in the streets was so bad that I can still hear the sounds of it. But we were lucky they didn't take my family. And a week later, when things quieted down and the fire was extinguished and the shooting stopped, the Germans left the area, and we went back to our house. Our house was standing all alone in this area because all the houses were burned down. Once again, we were home. But every day, there was killing and shooting going on. I can still remember, especially the religious Jews, the Orthodox Jews. They were down on their hands and knees, and these Germans were towering over them, laughing, ridiculing, torturing, tearing their hair out, shaving their beards off, and knowing, coming from an Orthodox home, from a religious home, I knew the humiliation, the terrible thing that they are doing to these beautiful people. And it hurt. It hurt. It was a scary experience. Soon after, they came out with an order to put on the yellow star. Then we were more recognizable. Then they came out with another order to move in to the ghetto. The ghetto was a small area. We know about ghettos in the United States, but it's nothing like that, because our ghetto was closed up with fences, with wires, just a few exits and entries to the ghetto. Inside, the Jewish policemen were watching the ghetto inside the walls. Outside the walls, there were assessmen with machine guns, with barking dogs. Nevertheless, Białystok was still very lucky compared to other cities in Poland, because our city belonged to Prussia, and the business people, the Germans, needed the Jews of Białystok to work for them. We had a lot of people. We were the second largest city who was producing woolens, wool factories we had. We were producing very fine furniture. We knew how to do dye material, fabric, and they opened factories and people were working. We were given very little food, but nevertheless it was much better than other ghettos where there was complete starvation. This way, a lot of Jews were able to survive for the time being. One day there was an action. It means they came into the ghetto and they said that they were going to send some people to another city for work. We didn't know that they were sending those people to be killed. When they came into the ghetto to take out Jews, they took out the first time about 10,000 Jews. My family was hiding in the attic. It was a very narrow space, just enough room to crawl in there, and we were lying a whole week in the attic, listening how they were shooting and killing people outdoors. We heard them walk into our building. They were always yelling. It sounded to me like barking dogs. I can still hear the way they were screaming. In our building, there was one room where 40 people were hiding. In front of that room, in front of the door, there was a clothes closet. So when the Nazis walked into the room, they couldn't see, they didn't know that behind that closet there is a room with 40 people. There was one baby with them, and the young mother was holding this child. And somebody took out a pillow to cover this child, so the child shouldn't cry and give out the rest of the people. By the time the Nazis were gone, this beautiful child was dead, and this young mother went insane. It was such a horrible experience. But experiences like this were every day happening. A lot of people went insane because they just couldn't take it, what was going on. After the week was over, with all the killing, many thousands of people were lying in the streets dead. Life went back to normal, what at that time was normal, and people were working again. They went again to factories and to work. They were taken out of the ghetto. My brother was a good photographer, in general, he's very capable with the hands. And they took him to a place, to a Nazi, to work, where he was developing the films that he was taking every day in the streets. And I wish to God I had these pictures that my brother used to bring home to show us what was going on inside and outside the ghetto. One day, the Jewish police came. They said that they are going to send me to work. I was a little girl. I was only in 5th grade when the war broke out. I was never away from my mother. And it was such a scary and frightening experience. They took me to jail, and there I was lying like some kind of a inhuman being, and waiting, not knowing where they are going to send me, whether I'll ever see my mother again. And I was so scared. But again, I was just lucky, because my brother at that time was working on a construction building. And the engineer, the German, fell and broke his leg, so he asked my brother to go on with the construction, to finish it. He went to the Oberführer, Otto is his name, was his name, and he said to him, "My little sister was arrested. They are sending her to work. Can you take her out of jail and bring her here so that she should work with us here?" And at first he said, "There are no women on this construction," but my brother was pleading with him, and he came to jail. He took me out, and he took me outside of the ghetto somewhere to for permission to allow me to be sent to that place to work. And again, it was such a scary, frightening experience to be with all the Nazis. They were yelling at him. Half of it I didn't know what they were screaming about. And he took me back to the ghetto, and I started to work with my brother on the construction. We carried the bricks. We used to line up and take 2 bricks and throw it until we got it on top of the building. We caught it and threw it to the next person. I mixed cement, I carried water, I laid the bricks, I learned to do all the work. My hands were bleeding, but nevertheless, I was with my family and I was still alive. Another day came when again they came for they took out about 10,000 people of the ghetto. And again, my mother and brother were hiding in the attic. We heard at night, we heard rumors that there is the factory where they are producing the furniture, that these people, they can go there. If you are working, they are not going to take these people with their families. So my brother managed to go into that factory to work, and he took me and my mother with him. We felt safe for a little while, but one evening the Nazis came in and they started to take people from the factory. Again, it was a terrifying experience. And luckily, they didn't take me nor my mother. Again, we survived. After a week of this horror, we went back home. We found out that that time they took my grandfather and my uncle. And again, life started to be a little bit normal again, hoping that one day the war will be over and perhaps we'll tell the story. There was a lady in this factory who said to me, "Mein Kind, my child, you are so young. I know you will survive the war. Remember, I have children in New York." And she told me her name and I can't remember it. She said, "If you go to America, tell my children what happened to me." I wish I knew who her children are. Then the day came when they closed up the ghetto, and they told us to gather in 6 streets. My aunt lived in that area, so my mother said, let's go together to be together with the family. We went to my aunt's house. It was a little wooden house. My uncle had prepared a hiding place in that house. We didn't know at that time exactly where it was. We came in, and it was a little room. My family was not there anymore. And then I was happy. I thought they must be hiding. Before we had managed to inquire what happened to them, where are they? There were strangers in the house. All of a sudden, they started to shoot outside, and the bullets were coming crisscrossing through the walls. The walls were thin, and the windows, and the bullets were flying over our heads. My brother said, drop to the floor. So we dropped to the floor, and the bullets kept coming. Just at that time, my brother saw my grandmother shot outside in the street, and she fell on top of a pile of bodies. We crawled out from that little room into the back of the house in another room. My brother went underneath the bed, and I crawled right after him underneath the bed. We were both lying on one side, and my mother was running like a scared mouse, didn't know what to do. The room was so tiny, just the bed and a big closet, closed closet, and full of packages on the floor scattered. So my brother said, jump into the closet. She jumped into the closet, threw all the clothes on top of her, like this. She was hidden there. And just then, an assessment walked into the room. The boots were always shining like a mirror. You could look into the boots and see yourself. And he walked into that room, and he kicked the valises, everything, and he said, "This verfluchte Juden, sie waren da. These damned Jews, they were here." And he stopped right in front of my nose, near the bed. When I looked at his boots, I saw my face, and my heart started to beat so hard. And I prayed to God. I said, how do I stop it from beating? I was afraid he's going to hear my heart. And I don't know how to get it quiet again. And he's standing there, and he's looking at this valise, and I was sure he's going to pick it up and he will see me. And he kicked this valise, turned around, and walked out of the room. Outside, the shooting, the killing, the fire engines, it was something awful. Until night, it got quiet, it got dark, and we could hear everybody moving out of the area. All of a sudden, a door opened in the floor, and somebody stuck his head out, and here I'm happy again. And I say, hey, my family is there hiding. We walk in, and nobody of my family is there, only strangers. My uncle was gone, my aunt wasn't there, my grandparents, nobody. We were standing, it was just a plain hall with ground, and there wasn't enough oxygen for all of us to breathe. We turned on a candle, and the candle went out. And as I was standing there with the ground, next to the ground, I heard children cry. Hundreds and hundreds of children were crying. And I could see them, I could imagine them out in the darkness, in the middle of the night, all by themselves, without a mother, without a father, hungry, in diapers, older kids, younger kids. I could just visualize them. And these cries, these screams, I heard it all my life. It followed me wherever I went. I couldn't get rid of these screams. I could have been there with these children. I couldn't talk about it, never. These children were with me always. In the early morning, we decided we cannot remain there. There isn't enough space for all of us. And somebody said, we have to go. There is another place where he knows we can hide. So we went in the early morning through backyards of dead bodies. We walked until we reached another street. And there was this building, I don't remember, 3 stories high. And we went up on the top and in the attic. And on one side of the attic, there were young people, partisans. They were going to go and fight. They were going, these Białystok partisans were going to break open the ghetto walls and see whoever can run, because the woods were not far, the forests were not far away from the city. They figured whoever will save, and whoever has to die will die fighting rather than be sent away. But the Germans didn't want to have another thing like they had in the Warsaw Ghetto, the uprising. So they surprised us and they came in earlier than expected. So these young boys and girls were caught by surprise and they were hiding in this attic. They said there is no place, no room where they are, but on the other side of the building there is exactly the same type of attic. We can go and hide there. So we were hiding in the attic. In the middle of the night, they used to go out and search for water. The Germans cut off, or the Poles, they cut off the water, they cut off the electricity, there was no food. So they found water in the toilets, filthy, dirty water. And they brought it back and they used it, they found flour, and they used to mix this on a Primus machine. They used to cook this, boil the water and mix it with the flour, and everybody got a cup full of that mixture every night. That's all we had. One night they went out to look for contacts, and one of the boys, handsome young man, 20, I don't know, handsome, tall, he was shot with a dum-dum bullet, and the skin was torn in his leg, and this set in gangrene in his body, and he was screaming every day, every night, and we were scared that they'll find us. He was like an animal screaming. And one of the girls, her father was a doctor. She knew where she may find some medication. So she went searching at night for medicine. They found some poison, and they put him to sleep, because he couldn't go on in this torture. And in the middle of the night, these boys and girls, my brother was with them, and with the bare hands they dug up a grave and put him in there and covered it. And the following night they decided to leave, to go to the forest. And I, that night, didn't eat, I didn't drink. I was sitting there. I didn't want to say anything to my mother. I was remaining there with my mother hidden. And I said, if I won't hear shots for 2 hours, I hope they'll reach the forest. And maybe an hour later, I heard shots. And I said, they are dead. And every hair in my head stood up like a needle. And after that, these needles just didn't go away. I always had that pain in my head. And I didn't know anything about my brother anymore. I was sure he's dead. A week later, Paul was searching for hidden jewels or treasures, and he found us. He didn't wait long. He ran to the Germans and told them that Jews are hiding. No sooner he ran away, we ran out of the building. I jumped out from a second-story building onto a lower building, and I was hiding in the backyard. I heard a Nazi walking up and down, searching, and I was lying in a narrow space in water on one side until my body grew numb. I felt needles go through my body, and I didn't dare breathe. When it got dark again, I heard one of the people who was with us in the attic was calling that it's safe to come out, that everybody is gone. I came out, and there we gathered one by one. Everybody came out from his hiding, and no sooner we all were together, the Germans were hidden there too, and they arrested us. They took us to jail. They kept us in jail for a little while, and then they sent us to Stutthof. This is near Gdańsk. Again, they gave us a half a loaf of bread, and they told us to keep it for 3 days, that we won't get any other food. But I didn't trust them. I thought that they are going to kill us. And I was so hungry. I said, once I'm going to eat all the food, all the bread that I have, just to feel once that I'm not hungry. And then I just didn't care what will happen. So I finished my half loaf bread. They brought us to Gdańsk and took us off the train and led us through the streets. And there were Polish boys and girls running after us and pointing a finger and calling names and laughing and smiling. And I was so humiliated. Who are they and who am I? I'm also a child, just like they. I had a normal life till then. Why are they pointing a finger at me? It was such a shame. It felt so bad. And they took us to another train, and from there I heard on the train that they are going to push us into the Baltic, that a lot of people were pushed in there. We arrived in the middle of the night somewhere in a forest, and there were strong lights thrown at us, and I could hear the shouting in the back. I could hear the Germans there and dogs. I didn't know where I was. I still don't know where it was exactly. And from there they took us to Stutthof. They told us, some people were there already, some Jews, and they told us that till then they were killing the Jews, whoever arrived. But from now on they are not killing anymore. We stayed in Stutthof for a little while, and then they shipped us from Stutthof, which is up north, down south to Birkenau, Auschwitz. We were in open cattle trains. The snow was falling. It was December or January, and it was very cold, and the snow was melting underneath us. So I was standing up on that trip and holding my mother on my feet, and this served two purposes. Number one, my mother didn't have to sit in that melted snow, and number two, it kept my feet warm until we arrived in Birkenau. In Birkenau, they took us into one block where they shaved our heads, the hair off. They took away our clothes, and they said they were sending us to take a shower. I didn't believe it, because I heard that there is gas coming out of the showers. So when I went into that room and I looked which hole it is that the gas is coming out. And then we went through that shower, no soap, no towels. They chased us out in the street and to another hall. And there were two big assessments standing in the doorway. And one of them was yelling, rechts, links, links, rechts, links. I didn't know. I knew one thing, that maybe, perhaps, the young people, the strong people, were going to be sent to work. And I was looking just which way do the young people go. And I held my mother in front of me. I managed to find some red paint, and I scratched it off and put it on my mother's cheek so that she should look younger. She was only 45 years old, 44 years old, already too old to live. And I held my mother in front of me, and I don't know whether he said rechts or links, but I pushed her in the right direction, and I followed her. And sure enough, we were sent to a place where we were working, Block 2. We were building bombs there. The hysteria after they brought us back to that block is just indescribable. Children were separated from parents. Parents were separated from children. They were screaming, they were crying. Some people pointed a finger at me and my mother because there were only 3 mothers and 3 children in our group that survived that selection. And I was just one of these 3 with my mother. I was scared. There was such a hysteria that I pushed my mother into one of the corners, like hidden away, and I was there, and they should just forget about us. Then they started to take us to work to the Farber factory, where we were producing bombs. I was working in a room where we were putting the powder with a little wire together in a cone. And once in a while, I would dip the wire into water, hoping that it's going to rust and it's not going to explode. Sometimes I would walk into that little powder room where the powder was, and I knew the girls who were working there. One of the girls was hung because she carried out powder, and she was caught and she was hung in Auschwitz. One day I came back from work, and the Stube-Älteste met me at the entrance of Birkenau, and she said that my mother fell and broke her arm, and she took her to the hospital. Well, this was frightening, because every day, almost every day, they came and took these people away to the crematorium. And I said, that's it, I won't have my mother anymore. She said, do you want to go and visit your mother? Of course I want to see my mother, but I was scared. What if they come in just then when I'm in the hospital and they take me too? But I went to see my mother. And these dead bodies, this bone and skin, these starved bodies, sick people all around, dysentery, this smell was so horrible. It followed me everywhere. I saw my mother and I went back to my block. A few days later, the same Stubenälteste, she liked me and my mother, and she brought my mother back from the hospital, and she was able to go back to work again. So here again I am with my mother, and I was so happy. In the meantime, the front, the Russians were closing in, and we could hear already the shooting on the front. And one day they decided to close up the Birkenau, and they took us into the camp where the Auschwitz was. And one morning I'm standing appel to be counted, and at that time I didn't know where I was, but now I know it was next to Block 10. And in the early morning I hear a voice. Cesare, mein Kind. That was my name. It was my aunt. She recognized me. She saw me through the window. She was in Block 10. And I didn't know at that time what Block 10 was. And I could hear a voice of an insane woman screaming, my child, my child. She had she had twins just before the ghetto was closed, and I was with her in the hospital when she gave birth. One baby died right away. The other child survived. And then they took her away, and they took her child away. And they took her to Block 10 to experiment on her. And she was such a beautiful woman, such a proud woman. There wasn't a person who didn't turn his head when she walked in the street. They would turn around to look at her twice. And there she was in her own pain. And one day I managed to go into Block 10 to see her. And she was crying and holding me. I was her baby. And that was the only time I saw her in Block 10. Then soon after that they closed up Auschwitz, and we went out on the long march. 7 days and 7 nights we marched. And in the middle of the night, when they told us once to rest, I hear in the dark, Frau Einschindler. And I said, Frau Einschindler, who is that? Is that my aunt? That's her name? Frau Einschindler, are you from Białystok? And sure enough, this was my aunt. And I'm so happy. I have again my aunt and my mother, and we are together again. And there was always hope, praying and hoping that maybe the war will be over soon and we'll survive. And we marched until we got to Ravensbrück. In Ravensbrück, it was a new horror. The Ukrainians, although they were prisoners, they were killing us. They were killing the Jews. They were always hitting us. The little food that they gave us, we couldn't get it without being hit. But we didn't stay long in Ravensbrück. They took us again on another journey. And they separated me from my mother. They took my mother away. And I was so scared that if they'll take her away, they'll kill her. So I watched in which direction they took her. And as soon as I was able, I ran out of my group and I ran there and grabbed her and pulled her back to where I stayed. But the Germans were always pünktlich. Everything had to be just so. And they counted, and they found out that one person is missing over there, and they started to scream, "Where is this prisoner?" And I knew they were going to kill us. Once they find out, they kill us both. But they were already in a hurry. They had to run. So they forgot about that prisoner, and they took us on a train ride. On the train, somebody stole my boots, my shoes. It was like the Dutch people are wearing the wooden shoes. That's what I had, open shoes, and they stole it from me. They took us to Neustadt. We were in a little room, 80 women. And every morning they took us out to be counted, and the ground was frozen, and I was standing there on the frozen ground, and everybody's eyes was turned on my feet that I'll freeze to death. But miracles happened, and this Stubeälteste, she was so bad. So she was a prostitute, a German woman, but she was overlooking the Jewish people. And she liked me. And as soon as she counted us, she told me that I can go back into the room. So I didn't have to stay all the hours on the frozen ground like with all the others. But my aunt got sick, and she was burning at night. She was burning with fever. And somebody said to me that in the hospital, they don't take out the people anymore. They let them be there. So I thought, well, maybe she'll be more comfortable in the hospital. I'll take her there. I took her to the hospital, And then I went back a few days later to see her. And there, this beautiful woman, all I can see is just her big eyes, a sunken face. The lips were completely dried, parched. And she says to me, "Give me a little bit of water." And I didn't have a little bit of water to give her. She says, "I'm hungry. Bring me something to eat." And I didn't have anything to give her. And 5 days before the war was over, they came in with a truck and took her away. And I never saw her again. And the war was over. My mother and I survived. And where do you go? We went back, found a little town where we went. And soon the Russians came there, and this was a new ordeal to protect myself from the Russian soldiers. And we stayed in a house with a German family. Luckily, they had 2 young daughters, so they were interested in hiding the 2 daughters, so they were willing to hide me too. The Russians were constantly coming, young girls. But I managed to get a job, and I worked for the Russian army, producing butter and other things. My mother got sick, and I took her to the hospital, to the city, and I would go every other day to see her in the hospital. I acquainted a Russian general, and he was a doctor, so he took me once to that hospital to find out how my mother was doing. And that's when the war was over, and my mother didn't want to remain in Germany. She wanted to go back to Poland. I didn't want to go back to Poland to live there ever again, because I said I cannot go back to a country where the ground is mixed with Jewish blood. I will go back to search for my family, but not to live there. And we went back to Poland, and the first remark we heard, "Look at them. We killed them, and they are still here, still alive. So many of them. So many of them still alive." We had no home to go to, no place to put our head down. We slept in the street. Until somebody told me that there is a public house where we can go and stay. I left my mother in Lodz, and I went back to Białystok. In Białystok, I asked, "Where is the Jewish community?" They told me where it was, and I came in. There were some Jews, but most of them were not from Białystok. They were from the surrounding area. The Jewish joint sent packages, but there were some people who got it. And I still carried that stigma of being embarrassed, being ashamed. You don't ask for bread. This is for beggars, not for nice people. Even though I was hungry, I wouldn't say to anybody I'm hungry. But they told me that if I'm from Białystok, I'm supposed to get a package. So I said to somebody that I'm from Białystok, and they laughed at me. They said, "From which town do you come?" So I got quiet again. Just then somebody came in with letters. And there were 2 letters from my father, who lived in the United States, and he was inquiring about his parents, my grandparents, and his sisters and brothers, his sisters and children. And I said, "This letter is from my father. it was such a shock to everybody that there is anyone that has a father in the United States. It was unbelievable. So that's how I got in touch with my father. I wrote to him and told him about the family and that my mother and I are alive. I found out at that time that my brother is alive somewhere, but they didn't know where. So I wrote to every office in Poland and Russia, inquiring if they know of my brother. And sure enough, one of these postcards came to a lady. She lives now in Israel, and she knew my brother, and she sent it to him. He was already in the Russian army. He fought in the partisans. He has a big story to tell about the partisans. And then he was in the army, and he never went back to Białystok, because afterwards he told me that he did go back to this Hon to look for us. He wanted to take us to the woods, to the partisans, and we were gone. So he was convinced that we are not alive. And since we were not alive, he had no reason to go back to look for us. So that's how I found my brother. And we lived in Poland 1 year. And after that, just when they closed up the borders, we went back to Germany, because I didn't want to remain in Poland. I got in touch with my brother. I let him know my father's address in the United States, and I let my father know where my brother is. And then we went back to Germany, where later I met my brother. I had an experience when I came to the United States. I was young, and my father sent me to school, to high school, first to learn English. And I decided that I'm so young, I'm going to wrap my whole experience up and put it away. I don't want to live with it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I'm going to live in a new country, learn a new way of life, get married maybe, have a nice family, and build a new life. And I was pretty successful in doing it, until one day my husband said he wants to go back to Poland because his father died of starvation in Lodz, and he is on the cemetery in Lodz. He wants to visit his father's grave. I fought it. I didn't want him to go there, but I didn't want him to go by himself. So we together went to Poland. And I came into Białystok. And where I lived, that area is completely rebuilt. The cemetery nearby, there is a big park where it says Dla Bohaterów Polskich, for the Polish heroes, in the name of the Polish heroes. I went to the house where my grandparents, my father's parents, lived, and this is gone too, except for a little garden. They had 3 gardens, and one little garden still stands there, and my father planted the trees, and the apples are still growing on these trees. And I was standing in front of that fence, and I froze to the ground. And all of a sudden, I was transformed into my childhood, and I was a baby again. And I saw it vividly. I saw myself. I was running and laughing, and I was happy, and I was skipping rope and dancing, and my cousins and my brother and my grandparents. I could smell the fish and the challah, and I could hear my uncles and my aunts, and I could see the weddings and the funerals and the births, and everything came back to me. And I just couldn't move from that ground. It was raining. It was a miserable day, and my heart was so troubled, so hard. And we went back to the city. I went away from that spot. I wanted to visit other places, but I got such a cold feeling. I asked Paul, is there a Jewish community house? And he looks at me, he says, a Jewish community house? Ha, 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 ha. Like I'd come out of the sky. It never existed. What do you mean? And here I can see I'm standing on Sienkiewicza. It was a main street where the Jewish youth, these beautiful girls, and Białystok was known for having most beautiful women. And the beautiful men, the boys, we were walking up and down. That's where we met. And the theater. And everybody is gone. Everything is gone. A way of life that will never be again. And I got the chills. And I said, Barry, I don't want to stay here any longer. Let's get out of here. And we went straight from Białystok to Lodz. Of course, my husband, his dream of going to the cemetery, just couldn't wait to get there. I went into bed. I couldn't go with him. My thoughts, it was like a film. Everything was coming back to me. And all of a sudden, I started to dream. For weeks and weeks, I was dreaming. The first time in my life, and that was the last time. I never dreamt again. But for several weeks, everything kept coming to me. My husband ran out to search, to find the cemetery, to find his way around. And he came back. He was excited. He talked to me. And next morning, we went to the cemetery. It was raining cats and dogs. It was something like heaven opened up and all the waters came down. And we went down to the cemetery, and Paul, a drunk, and good for nothing, he said, you won't find it. You won't find it. My husband remembered this spot where his father was buried. And the grass there was over our heads. And I was afraid I'll lose him in the grass, because you just couldn't see anything above it. So we were walking in and going like this and searching in the grass. And this Paul is screaming, Psia krew cholera. You won't find it. Let's go back. It was raining, it was pouring, and I was drenched, wet. And my husband wouldn't give up. His whole body was shaking, and he had to find this spot where his father was. And finally we found it. And we started to tear out the grass and push the ground away. And our hands were shaking, and my husband, I could see him shaking. If he could only touch his father. It was such an experience. I'll never forget it. And he said Kaddish. And then we left. We walked next day through the streets, and we looked. Everything is gone. And we didn't want to stay long. We went out to Birkenau. We went out to Auschwitz. We stopped in Krakow just to stay overnight. And we went back home. When we came home, and we told our children about our experience and showed them the pictures, our older daughter, Carlin, and our son-in-law said, we are going next year to Poland to see where you come from. Well, I didn't want to see it again, but I said, Carlin, if you decided to go to Poland, I want you to see it through my eyes and not through the Poles. And we arrived to Warsaw. It was a beautiful day. And as we were driving through the street, she says, gee, how beautiful. The streets are so wide and clear air, fresh, the flowers, the trees. And when she said it's beautiful, I felt something turn inside of me. And I said, I don't want you to love it. Never. You are going to feel what I feel. And then we were driving through the cities from one end to the other, through the little towns where Jews who used to live. And I said, Carlin, remember, see these places, it was full of our people. We lived here. The Jewish people lived here for 1,000 years. They invited us to come to live because we helped them. We knew how to read and write. The Poles didn't know how to read and write. And we had a way of life, whatever it was. There were summers, there were weddings, there were children birth, there were good times, bad times. It was a way of life. And these little villages, in the early morning you could hear the nigandol, the song, the religious, the pious Jew was sitting and he was praying. And you could hear it. And you could hear Friday the smell of the fish. I said, smell it. It's not here anymore, but smell the challah. Smell the fish. It was here once, and it's gone. They wiped it out. And I want you to know and tell your children's children what it was like, what kind of life we had. And it's all gone. They took it away from us. It will never happen again. And then we came to Birkenau, and I showed her where I spent a whole year watching the chimney through that window. And I could hear day after day, night and day. I heard the transports arriving, and I heard the people getting off the trains. And then I looked out on the chimney, and it was a red flame shooting up to the sky like a red tongue. It was hitting the sky, and the sky was all black, turning black. And always I was watching and looking. And I said, which of my grandparents is coming out through that chimney now? Which of my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, our relatives, the neighbors, who is going through that chimney now? For 1 year I watched it. And the smell was so awful. The sizzling bodies. It was so terrible that for years, when I had to go somewhere and there was a big chimney where they have the gasoline stations, I would go for miles out of my way. I shouldn't see a chimney again. I said, that's what I watched for 1 year. And then we went into Auschwitz, to the museum, where there is that big room with valises. And there is a big room with just hair, and all the hair is gray. Why? I don't know. After all, people have different colored hair, and this hair is all gray. And then there is a room with twisted glasses, and a room with parts of the body. And then one room where we used to get the food, the little dishes. And then there is a table, and on that table, underneath a glass, there is beautiful clothes of children. And little shoes, handmade shoes, and the ruffles, and the little hats that they were wearing, and little toys. And my daughter has 2 beautiful children, and she was standing there, crushed, looking at these children's clothes. And this is what is left, this museum. But Auschwitz is quiet. You don't have these dead bodies anymore. It's all over flowers and trees. The flowers are blooming. And when I stopped at Block 10, where my aunt was tortured with so many other people, nobody will ever know of that torture. Now, when we came back with our daughter and son-in-law, we were very lucky because we met the Carter's Commission on the Holocaust Studies in Warsaw, and they invited us to join them. And
could you tell us just a little about the commission so we can understand?
This is Ben Mead, and he is now also the organizer of the gathering in Washington. Also, he was the organizer of the gathering in Jerusalem. And that evening, he invited us to have dinner with him in the hotel. And as soon as we walked into the restaurant, they started to play Havana Gila. And we were so shocked, I had the goose pimples all over. Imagine in Poland playing the Havana Gila for us. So this is my daughter, son-in-law, my husband, and Ben Mead, who invited us to join them. And with the commission, we went everywhere, to the monument. Eli Wiesel here made beautiful speech. The Polish consulate was there, my husband, my children, and here was the signing of the book, the official signing. Now, Ben Mead had a problem because the Polish government wanted to take us to a place other than Treblinka, because Treblinka is the only concentration camp where just Jews were killed. And the Poles are claiming that it was a Polish problem, that the Poles were killed just like the Jews. So he said, no, it was not just a Polish problem, it was a Jewish problem, and he refused to give in. And we did go to Treblinka. And this is where Anielewicz fell, and we had a special memorial in that place. And this is the monument after the boys that fell and fighting the Warsaw Ghetto. And then it was Treblinka. This is Treblinka. We entered here, and I have a little story about Treblinka. We came in and we entered like through a building, but actually there was no building, it was just the front. And when I got on the other side, I saw a big, huge forest, and I saw hundreds, as a matter of fact, there are 1,800 stones, big ones and small ones and fat ones and skinny ones, and each stone represents another city of Poland, or of Europe. I think of Poland. Anyway, from a distance, when I looked at these stones, they are dark brown, black almost, and it looked like bodies sticking out of the ground. It was windy, and the wind was woo-hoo like this, and it was a very strong wind. And it sounded like there is a cry coming out of the ground, going up to heaven. And it was such a horrifying experience. This cry, these stones, they look to me like grandparents, like people are sticking out of the grave, and they are screaming up to heaven for the injustice done to them. We lit candles, and we were standing there over an open grave. You can see the bodies, the bones right here. It's maybe a block long. And here Eli Wiesel speaking, and my son-in-law bent down to take a picture between the two stones. When he got up, he tried to wipe his pants off, and somebody said to him, "Don't try to wipe it off, it's the fat of the people." And he started to shake, the whole body started to shake. After all, his family also perished in Treblinka, and here he's carrying the fate of his unknown grandparents, uncles, aunts, or whoever, and it was a horrifying experience. And here my daughter picked up some flowers, and she says, "These are the flowers growing on the ashes of our people." And her hand, her whole body was shaking. And here I am in front of a stone which reads Białystok. And here is a monument which says "Never Again." And here is another monument like a gate. We spent that day in Treblinka, and then some of them flew to Krakow, and the next day went to Auschwitz. And I found the block where I spent 1 year, and that's where I used to sleep a whole year, and I showed it to my daughter, that's where I spent the year. And I showed her the distance from the rails, how close it was to the block. And we went on to Auschwitz from Birkenau. And here is block 20, the Jewish block, and they keep it closed. They don't really show it. They opened it specially for us. And no sooner Eli Wiesel crossed to the next room, they turned the lights off so that I couldn't even have a good look at it. And everything is now so peaceful. Here is the sign where it said, "Arbeit macht das Leben süß." And here is the crematorium. And this is what I wanted my child to see, because without me, she would never know the smell, the feeling, what it was like to be, the tortures. These flowers now are beautiful. The trees are growing on 20 feet of ashes for miles and miles. There is a luscious green forest, and it's so beautiful. Of course, the ashes of our people are giving such a good base for growing these trees and the flowers. And this is what I wanted my children to see. And I said to my grandchildren when I came back, I don't want to see Poland again. But if you ever decide when you grow up that you want to go to Poland, I will go again. And I never want you to forget it, what happened to our people. After the war, when I came back to Germany, by coincidence, I met my husband on the train. And we started to go. We went for 1 year in Nuremberg. And after that, my father made papers for me, and I went to the United States, and I told my husband I'll wait for him if he wants to wait for me. I refused to get married and to leave him in Germany. I said, if you want to wait and I'll wait, we'll marry in the United States, which we did. We married. I came first to New York, and I went to school there. I went to high school and finished. And then he came to Canada, and I went up to Montreal where we were married, and we had 2 beautiful daughters. We lived in Montreal for 7 years, and then we came to California, and where we've been living since that time. My 2 daughters are married, and we have 5 beautiful grandchildren. And we have a very happy life, a good life. And but I decided that since that time that I came back from Poland, that this story is history, and I don't want that it should die together with me, especially since there are now people writing books that it never happened. I do go to schools, and I do talk to young people. I talk to teachers, and I tell them what happened, and I also tell them not to forget and not to be ignorant, to because history has a way of repeating itself, and especially with the Jewish people. You have to know what is going on. You have to fight, because anti-Semitism was for the last 2,000 years. It will never go away. We have to learn to live with it and to fight it.
Thank you very much, Selene.
Thank you.